If you're not doing this, you could be leaving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on the table, and it's really free money. Hey everyone, welcome to another video. My name is Ali and let's talk about finance. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to invest in your 20s. Now, when you think about investing, you're probably thinking about putting money into the stock market or some form of investment and letting that money grow. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. There are going to be 4 things that I'm going to be touching on in this video, and each and every single one of these things will get you ahead in the future. When it comes to investing in your 20s, sometimes it really is just to get rid of any bad habits that you might have built when you were in your teens, and sometimes it really is just to learn how to get ahead. It's okay to make mistakes in your 20s. You still have a lot of time on your hands. That is the one thing that you have the most of, and that's time. And it's okay if you mess up here or there. It's not going to be the end of the world. So let's get right into it. The very first thing that I would do is pay off any high interest debt. So any debt that you might have accumulated in your teens, maybe even in your early 20s, whether that's on a credit card, line of credit, it could potentially be student loans as well. It really depends on your situation. Now, in terms of paying off high interest debt, there are a couple ways that you can go about it. The way that I like to do it is by paying off the loan with the highest interest first. This is usually credit cards, maybe a line of credit, or even something like a car loan. What I would do is I would just take all of the loans that you have and put them all together and take a look and see which one you're paying the most interest on. And I would focus on paying that one off first. Now, once you finish paying off the first loan on the list, then I would go and I would focus on the next one. So this is the debt snowball effect. Now let me give you an example. Say, for example, you have a total of 3 different loans. You have a credit card, you have a line of credit, and you have a car loan. Let's say the credit card is at 20% interest. Let's say the line of credit is at 15% interest, and let's say the car loan is at 8% interest. What I would do is I would put as much money as possible towards the credit card. Once you fully pay off that credit card, that payment that you were making towards the credit card now gets put towards that line of credit. Now, you keep paying off that line of credit, of course, making sure that you make any minimum payment so then you don't have any sort of negative impact on your credit score. And then what I would do is once that line of credit is fully paid off, use that same amount of money that you were putting towards the credit card and the line of credit towards the car loan. Now, this will help you pay off any high interest debt or debt in general a lot faster. And once you have your debt fully paid off, then you could move on to the second thing that we're going to be talking about, and that's building out an emergency fund. So an emergency fund is really just money set aside where you're not investing it, where you're easily able to access it if there is ever an emergency. Now, an emergency in this case is not if there's a big massive sale at your favorite store, or if there's a new electronic that came out and you want the next best thing. It really is for emergencies. So in your 20s, in this case, it could be a lot of different things. One is you could potentially lose your job, and if you lose your job, you may not have an income for a certain period of time. That is an emergency. You still need to pay your bills, and you still need to make sure that you have enough to get by at the end of the day. Another potential emergency is, say, for example, you have a vehicle. If something happens to that vehicle and there's a big massive repair bill, say the repair bill is $500 or $1,000 or a couple $1,000, that can really have a big impact on you if you don't have that emergency fund set aside. Now, what I would focus on with the emergency fund is once you have all of the debt paid off, any money that you were putting towards the debt, you are already not used to having it to spend anyway. So I would use that to build out the emergency fund. The emergency fund in this case, the very first thing that I would do is I would focus on getting yourself to $1,000 set off to the side. Now, the reason I say get yourself to $1,000 is because if I were to tell you to save up 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, it's very, very overwhelming. If you focus on saving $1,000 first, then at least you can say, hey, if anything does happen, I have $1,000 there. For example, like in that vehicle example that I gave just earlier. Once you get to that $1,000 saved, then you could take a look and see what your expenses are on a monthly basis, multiply that by 3 to 6, and now use that as the goal in terms of how much money you're gonna have set off to the side. Now keep in mind that this does take a little bit of time to get to. It could take some people a year, it could take some people a couple of years to get to that specific figure. As long as you keep putting money off to the side, then at least you're working towards that 3 to 6 month mark. It doesn't happen overnight. You do have to be patient. You do also have to be disciplined to make sure you keep putting money into that emergency fund. Now, when I say to build out the emergency fund, it doesn't have to be sitting in just a plain account where you're not receiving any interest at all. I would probably put it into a high interest savings account. With regards to which high interest savings account, I would probably just put it into one that's very accessible, gives you the most amount of interest, and is just super easy for you. Now, the third thing that I would suggest when you're in your 20s is to really take advantage of any employer-sponsored group retirement plans. Now, the reason that I mention this specific thing is because a lot of people either don't know that they have this, or they're not taking full advantage of this. I've seen it a lot. Even personally for myself, early on in my career, I did not take advantage of all of these group retirement investments and any sort of matching when it comes to these group retirement investments. Now, these could come in a lot of different forms in terms of different accounts, but the most important thing to keep in mind is a lot of group retirement plans, whether it's a pension plan, whether it's a registered retirement savings plan, or any other form of group retirement investments, they really do give you the opportunity to build it out faster than you normally would if you were to do it on your own. And the reason I'm saying this is I'm going to use an example. I've seen a lot of plans where it's mandatory to put in 2% or 3% of your annual salary into these group retirement plans. Now, with that, your employer may match that 2% or 3%. Now, what a lot of people end up doing is they just end up doing that mandatory contributions. And that usually comes off from their paycheck. It automatically goes into these plans, and everyone's quite happy. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that in some plans, they do allow you to voluntarily contribute more into the plan. And the reason that this is important is because with those voluntary contributions, sometimes there is a matching on those voluntary contributions. So yes, you're going to be putting more money from your paycheck into this plan, but the employer could potentially be matching maybe 100% or even half of the amount of money, so 50% of the money that you put into these plans, just because you're putting that money in. This is very, very important because in the span of a year, if you're not doing this, you could be leaving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on the table, and it's really free money. It's one of those things that just because you put money into this group plan, your employer is providing you an additional bonus by putting money in on your behalf, which is money that you didn't have to work for. One thing to understand is if you're leaving thousands of dollars, if it's $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on the table every single year, in the span of your 20s, you could be leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table. I'm gonna make another video in terms of what to look for when it comes to these group plans, what types of accounts, what things are good, what things are not, and then that way there's a more in-depth video on these group plans, so you can really understand what these employers are really presenting to you. This is very important because I know in most situations the employer does not go through the package with you. The employer doesn't tell you, hey, you're leaving money on the table, because at the end of the day, it is really a benefit for you if you fully understand what that group plan is offering. The very last thing that I would recommend is when you're in your 20s, after paying off all of your debt, you're building out your emergency fund. And once you've also taken advantage of the maximum benefits of the group plans, then I would really take a look and see, how can you start investing in yourself? So whether that's through a tax-free savings account or a registered retirement savings plan, a first home savings account, an FHSA. Again, I'll talk about these types of accounts in a later video. But I would really start to focus on putting aside as much as you can. So for example, say you're making $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month, and you have to live off of $3,000 a month or $4,000 a month. Then you don't have any money left over to put off to the side. But if you're making $4,000 a month and your expenses at the end of the month are $3,600, that leaves you $400 at the end of the month. Now, what you can do is if you're saving that $400 a month, that's 10% of your paycheck. Imagine Imagine what you can do if you can set aside 15% or 20%. Then you have a lot more money to work with. And when you have a lot more money to work with, you can actually accumulate a lot more into those investments than you would if you were putting aside $100 or $50 a month or a couple $100s a month. And the most important thing to understand is when you're in your 20s, yes, we have a lot of time, right? And like I said at the very beginning of the video, you have room to make mistakes. But the most important thing to understand is what you put your money into in terms of investments won't make or break your investments long term. Whether you make 5%, 6%, 7%, it really doesn't matter when you're first starting out. And the reason for that is because 5% or 7% or even 10% of a small number is still going to be a small number. If you get yourself to $100 into an investment, if you end up making 7% or even 10%, you're only making $7 or $10 by the end of the year. It's not a lot of money. But if you can get yourself to $1,000 and you're making that same 7% or 10%, then you're at $70 or $100 for the year. Again, it doesn't sound like a lot because it isn't. At the end of the day, $100 for the entire year is less than $10 for each month. But if you get that same $1,000 up to $10,000, now you're adding another zero. That $70 is actually $700, and that $100 is actually $1,000. Now, you can imagine what happens when that $10,000 turns into $100,000. That $100,000, if you get a 7% return, now you're making $7,000 for the year. That's over $500 a month. So it's very important to understand that when you're building out your investments, you really just have to focus on being able to set aside as much as you can and then focus on the investments. Now, when I'm talking about investing, I don't talk about picking an individual stock because your best friend told you that this is going to go up and it's going to be the next best thing. I'm talking about actually putting your money off to the side, putting it into something that's reliable. And when I say reliable, I'm usually talking about a portfolio, whether that's a mutual fund, whether that's an ETF, or something similar in that manner. And the reason that I'm suggesting those is because when you don't know what to invest in, the best thing to do is to put it into something that professionals are managing. And like I said, if you make a 5% return, it's not going to make or break your investment portfolio, especially if you're starting off relatively slow. When you are able to accumulate a certain amount of money in those accounts, then it's important to take a look at what you're investing into. The most important thing is to just start. If you don't start, you're not going to be able to accumulate that $1,000, that $10,000, that $100,000. That might sound like a lot of money now. You'll actually be surprised at what you can do in a span of a year, or a couple years, or 5 years, or even 10 years. You will be a lot further ahead by building out these good habits than if you were to just wait because you don't know what to actually invest into. There you have it, guys. Those are the 4 things that I would focus on when you're in your 20s. If you guys like this video, drop a like, drop a comment. If you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And if there's anything in particular that you guys would like me to make a video about, please let me know down in the comments, and then that way I could make a video in the future to talk about that specific topic. Until next time, guys, have a good one.